Good morning. My name is Young, and I'm the Deputy Director of Interagency Partnership and Language Access at the New York City's Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, which we call MOIA. And I'm also joined by my other MOIA language access colleagues here today, Ken, Rowan, and Farah and Sam. You'll be seeing them interact during in the chat as well. At our last year's Open Data Week, we explored New York City's linguistic landscape through decoding New York City's linguistic diversity. Today is like the part two of that kind of language data work. We're moving from awareness and understanding of language data to more action, showing how to use and own language data in your organization. We have amazing speakers today from the New York City Department of City Planning and Clear Global. As we present today, please feel free to interact in the chat and ask any questions. Our team will be monitoring them and we'll spend some time at the end of the hour to answer any unanswered questions. Before we go into the speakers from our amazing speakers, I wanted to provide a little bit more background about New York City's language access work. As we explore the power of language data this hour, I'd like to ground us into some of the New York City's landscape of language. You might be familiar with this map if you attended last year's event, but Endangered Language Alliance have documented over 700 languages in New York City. Based on the census data, almost half of New Yorkers speak a language other than English at home. And almost 22%, which is almost 1 out of 4 or 5 New Yorkers, have limited English proficiency. If you look at that 22% of that data in a different way, that raw number is 1.8 million people who have active language barrier in New York City. This is a graph of all the most populous city in the US. And when we look at only the 1.8 million people, it's bigger than the whole population of Phoenix, even Philadelphia, San Antonio. So we're thinking about a city on its own when we are thinking about language access. Whether we're providing services or information in New York City, language should be a key component just by looking at these numbers and the data that's given. And also, based on that, we do have Local Law 30, which is our grounding law in New York City. The Local Law 30, which is enacted in 2017, established a critical requirement for city agencies to provide language access, including the designation of 10 citywide languages based on demographic data. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But our charge here at MOIA, we monitor and provide technical assistance to over 46 city agencies to advance this work around language access. It asks each city agencies to designate a language access coordinator, to create a plan of how to provide language services, and for agencies to actually provide those services, including translation and interpretation. There is also a language access complaint system that's built in, and we report on our progress to the city council and to the public. But here's what we've learned though. Language access is not a checklist. This is something that our agencies are pretty familiar with, but we think about language access as a continuous cycle of improvement. Our goal is to move beyond compliance with Local Law 30 and advance towards language justice, where diversity of languages are systematically integrated. And as you can see on the highlight, the key component of moving up that maturity model is data and community partnership. So how do we ensure that we are incorporating and utilizing data in our decision makings around language access? And why this data really matters is really with the community as well. As I mentioned, the Local Law 30 designated the 10 citywide languages, which you can see from here. It's a combination of census data and the public school data. We also have the temporary languages, which was established through the Local Law 13 of 2023. You can see some of the guidance that we'll probably provide on the link, but we have designated Wolof and Pular as one of the temporary languages. But too often, a lot of the things that we hear is that language selection is often based on an assumption rather than an intentional decision by organizations or agencies. We often hear that we'll just use the 10 languages and the temporary languages, and that should suffice the law. We have also heard we haven't heard any complaints, so our current approach must be working. We also heard that we know our communities, we don't need data to make an informed decision. But I want to make sure that we understand we're on the same page on this, but this is what happens when we only rely on assumptions. Here's the vicious cycle of language inequities. When we make decisions based on assumptions, we don't collect the data we base our decisions based on without evidence, and we default to majority or official languages. That leads to languages not being factored into or budgeted or planning or operations. That also leads to the population that we intended to reach not being able to reach those population, that which further widens the equity gaps, which also then makes it harder to identify language needs in the end. This cycle is particularly dangerous during emergencies and crises, when the stakes are highest and the need for accurate language data is most critical. And I know there's some gaps in data and there's some challenges with data in general, but data isn't just numbers. It reveals human needs and stories that might otherwise remain hidden. And it is the foundation for moving from a checkbox compliance to a genuine language justice. That being said, I laid the ground of why we're having this conversation today and why we wanted to bring together DCP, or Department of City Planning, and Clear Global. But now I'd like to introduce our presenters that will introduce about how they're building, using, and owning language data within their work. For the Department of City Planning, we have Erica, who is the Assistant Director of Population Division, specializing in census and American Community Survey data, as well as New York City's population projections. She also manages the digital tools that you'll hear about it today. And we also have Charles, who is Geographic Analyst at the Population Division. He is the lead for several of this division's interactive data tools, including New York City Population Map Viewer and the New York City Language Explorer, which you'll get to hear more about it today as well. And from Clear Global, we have Alice, who has been working in the humanitarian sector for the last 30 plus years. She joined Clear Global in 2017, working on local and thematic program development. Alice now leads Clear Global's work on language justice campaign. Okay, and now I'll pass it off to Erica and Charles.
Hey, I am Erica. I am going to talk a little bit about our tools and then pass it on to Charles to talk about a new tool that we're developing using language data. But before I get into that, we already touched on a few of these stats. Repetition doesn't hurt. Of the city's 8 million residents, ages 5 and over, nearly half speak a language other than English at home. About 22% of the population speak English less than very well, meaning that they have limited English proficiency, or what we refer to as the LEP population. And this phrase will come up a few times in our presentation, so just something to keep in mind. And this is the group that requires true language services. Spanish is spoken by close to half of the LEP population. Chinese is a distant second at 19%, followed by Russian, Bengali, Yiddish, and Haitian. And just 6 languages account for more than 80% of the LEP population in New York City. And while it might seem that focusing on the few top languages would allow resources to be efficiently targeted, the most commonly spoken languages differ significantly across neighborhoods in New York City. And as a result, language-specific resources must be tailored to the unique linguistic needs of each neighborhood. So at City Planning, we incorporate this language data into our online tools, Population Fact Finder and Population Map Viewer, to give easy access to this data to use for decision-making around language access and resources. So as I said, I'll touch on these 2 applications and then turn it over to Charles for the bulk of our section. So this slide here is showing 2 screenshots of different views from Population Fact Finder, or as we call it, PFF. This tool allows the user to select a single geography or create a custom selection of geographies and explore data from the census or the American Community Survey or ACS summary file. The data that we're using for languages comes from the American Community Survey, which is the most comprehensive survey for detailed population and housing characteristics. But because it's a survey, the data are subject to sampling variability, and the Census Bureau provides a margin of error along with the estimates. But our tools present the data with built-in guardrails so that you can confidently use them without needing to understand all these technical details and the wonkiness of the ACS and margins of error. For example, this screenshot on the right is showing gray text and arrows, which indicate the reliability and statistical significance of the data. Once you're on the profile side of the application, the language data are located in the ACS social profile in a section labeled language spoken at home. This allows you to explore your selected geography and see a breakdown of speakers by language, including those who fall into that LEP category. You can also compare your selection to another neighborhood, community district, borough, or the city. And we can go to them. So this is a screenshot from Population Map Viewer, our online tool that provides a visual representation of selected characteristics across New York City's neighborhoods and community districts. It offers a spatial view of a variable across the city and displays an ordinal ranking of the data by neighborhood or community district in the chart on the left. And as I mentioned earlier, ACS data come with margins of error, and those don't disappear when the data are mapped. To address this, all of our ACS maps produced by our division are created responsibly using our map reliability calculator, which you can find on our website. And this tool helps ensure that the maps do not represent the data. So what you're looking at, you can trust in the conclusions from what you're seeing in the categories. The ACS is released in two main data products, the summary file, which was used in Population Fact Finder, and the public use microdata sample, or PUMS. And the summary file represents the full sample of the survey. It includes a wide range of published tables on the Census Bureau site and on our site, and that's available down to the census check level. But when we move over to the PUMS file, it's a subsample, so it's more limited geographically, only available down to the community district level, but it provides much greater detail than what's available in the summary file. So in Population Map Viewer, we've included additional maps for additional languages using this PUMS data. However, because of that limitation geographically, these maps are only available when you're on the community district view. With this added detail, we're able to explore a more comprehensive set of languages than the broader groupings available from the summary file. And this is also what we've used in our new tool that we're developing, our Language Explorer dashboard. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charles to really dig into our new tool.
Thanks, Erica. So hi, everyone. I'm Charles, and I'm going to walk you through today our upcoming New York City Language Explorer application. We're really excited to be creating this because it'll allow you to really delve into the linguistic diversity of New York City in an intuitive and exciting way. The application itself is actually still being built out. We're still working on it, and it'll be live this year. But what I can show you today is a mock-up that I've prepared in PowerPoint that has all the general features and layout that we plan to include and simulate the experience of navigating the application. So here is the default page that you'll see on the application. And the first thing I want to point out is that we actually intend for this to be two applications in one, depending on different uses you might have. So I want to draw your attention to this switch in the header at the top of the application, which says Explore by Area or Explore by Language. So we have two modes you can choose to use the application in. If you're in Explore by Area mode, you can select a geography of interest and really delve into information about the LEP population and languages spoken in a particular geography. Or if you're in Explore by Language mode, you can focus on a particular language like Spanish or Chinese and really delve into that language's spread and composition in New York City. So I'll start with some of the features of the Explore by Area mode. So this is the default page you'll see, which is like a general profile for New York City as a whole. And each of these profiles is laid out the same way, where on the left you'll have a map and on the right you'll have a dashboard with different visualizations and numbers. I also want to draw your attention to that at the bottom of the map, you have the ability to switch geographies. So right now I'm in New York City, but if I clicked on borough, I would have a borough view and I could select, for example, the whole borough of Queens, and the information in the dashboard will update to show me Queens specific information. Or, please, community districts, and I will now see the same information for individual community districts. And so to go over what you're actually seeing in this dashboard on the right, what we have at the top is some general information about the LEP population. So for example, we provide the population 5 years and over, which just important distinction when we're talking about the LEP population, we describe it as a subset of the population 5 years and over, not the total population. Next to that is the total number who report speaking English less than very well. That's our LEP population. And next to that is the percentage that corresponds to of the pop 5 and over. So we can see here in Queens Community District 7, nearly 50% of the population 5 years and over speaks language other than English. And so for these smaller geographies, we want to include like comparable statistics to like larger geographies that is nested within. So in this example, we've provided what is the comparable percentage for all of Queens, 28%. And for New York City, it's 22%. So it just really underscores how in this example, the LE population is such a larger percentage comparatively. Some other features we include here are a list of just like the top languages spoken by the LEP population in your selected geography. And then also next to that, we have a pie chart that breaks down the different categories of English proficiency. So this 47% is that same 47% above that speak English less than very well. But some other categories include those who speak another language but also speak English. In this case, that's 24%. And the remaining 29% only speak English. And the last feature I want to call your attention to is if I scroll to the bottom end, please. Each of these profiles will have this interactive rank ordered chart that we are developing in Tableau. And by the way, the site itself is being created in ArcGIS Experience Builder, which we use for some of our other applications. But this Tableau feature is a really powerful way to see all of the detail that the underlying ACS dataset provides. And you can see information for every language that is available and spoken by the LEP population in your geography. So for example, you can see in this case, Chinese is such a large percentage of the LEP population compared to any other languages. And this feature will allow you to hover over each bar and see the exact percent and margin of error. Also want to point out that at the end of each bar, we have this margin of error range. And actually, one thing I forgot to mention is that you may have noticed that next to each of these numbers, we provide margins of error because, Erica spoke about, these are not like solid numbers. These are estimates based on samples. And wherever possible, we want to include that margin of error to help the user understand that these numbers should be understood within a range provided by the margin of error. So those are the main features of the area mode. Again, really great way to have a geography of interest and see all the data available there. But please. Now switching instead to the Explore by Language mode. So this mode is largely laid out the same way. But again, this is if you're interested in specific language at different geographies. You still have the map on the left. In this case, it's by default, it's going to be a Core Plus map by community district. In this case, this example is Spanish. Each of these breaks that you see pass our reliability standards. And these community districts in the darkest colors have the highest numbers of LEP Spanish speakers. So you can see that this is some of the CVs that are in darkest are like Upper Manhattan, the Bronx, parts of Queens, but really throughout New York City. And then how the dashboard differs in this mode is that at the top, you'll see some like New York City information. So for Spanish, we again provide the total LEP population for New York City, and below that, the total number who speak Spanish at home, and then the corresponding percent. So for New York City as a whole, the whole LEP population, nearly half speak Spanish at home. And then next to that, we provide a pie chart, just like a simple breakdown of English proficiency for all Spanish speakers. So this number we include here is the number of total Spanish speakers, whether they speak English or not. And this just breaks down for context, like what percentage of this population reports speaking English or being English proficient, and which report being limited English proficient. This next row below is meant to give some like borough level information. So just total numbers of LEP Spanish speakers by borough in this first box. And then next to it is a bar chart that shows you the percent of each borough's LEP population that speaks Spanish. And it's a really easy way to see at a glance like which boroughs fall above and which fall below the New York City average. And then the last feature here is, again, another rank ordered chart. In this, back one more slide, please. And yeah, the last feature at the bottom is another rank ordered chart, very similar to the one that I showed you for the area mode, except in this case, it's being ranked by community district rather than individual language. So we're ranking by what percentage of each community district's population speaks Spanish. LEP population speaks Spanish in this case. And you can see that the ones that show up at the very top of this list are those that are the darkest in the map. So that is a general overview of the features. Again, we're really excited to launch this, but I only showed you one example for a language in the language mode, just Spanish, the most widely spoken language in New York City, which, like I said, is represents about half of the LEP population in New York City. But if you go to in this mode, we want to include similar information and similar dashboards to delve into the top 20 most spoken languages by the LEP population in New York City. So that includes all the major ones, the designated languages for New York City, but then some lesser spoken ones that still have a major presence in New York City. So we're really excited that we'll be able to delve into this whole array of languages and take full advantage of the detail that the ACS data provides. Again, stay tuned. We plan to have this live later on this year, but it is still a work in progress. So we want to hear from users and anyone who's interested in language data, like what you would like to see here, if there's anything we may have missed, what you really like, if you have any suggestions for how we can improve the application. And anytime if you have any questions or feedback, we have this Map Viewer DL email. You can send us anything at any time. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here.
Amazing. Thank you, Erica and Charles. Keep the questions coming in the chat. We'll get to them through the chat, or if we can't, we'll address that in the end of the hour. But please, and I see a lot of excitement about this data set. Please share any feedback or any additional areas that you want to see from this data explorer. Next, we'll have Alice from Clear Global share a little bit more about how they utilize language data in their work.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm going to be talking in this presentation about how we're working around digital language data gaps, particularly in the international context, in humanitarian emergencies and development contexts. So if we can go to very briefly, if you don't know us, Clear Global is an international NGO, and we're working on a whole range of issues, the fundamental core of which is to make sure that regardless what language people speak, they can be heard, in their voices and needs can be taken into consideration, and they can get the information that they absolutely need in moments of crisis in their life, and also in long-term development discourse in their contexts. I'm going to start off with this is a little bit of a sort of part of the basics, but as you probably know, digital communication is all built on data. And the amount of data that's available very broadly drives how good digital communication and AI models are. So this is a very recently published diagram of how much information exists in digital form in different languages around the world. And very crudely, it tells you how good machine translation is likely to be in each language, as well as how well that community is going to be able to access other kind of digital models or use any kind of digital tool. So not surprisingly, what you're seeing on the far right-hand side is that the languages of wealthy contexts and big populations tend to rank at the top. But you can also see that many really big populations are still really struggling to get digital information. So I've circled a few of them to draw your attention to it. There's about 30 million Saraiki speakers in Pakistan who have hardly any access to digital information at all, which means that organizations can't create chatbots or tools to be able to hear from that population. There's about 200 million or so Swahili speakers who are still in the very low category of the quality of machine translation and voice tools that they might be able to use. And that would be particularly true if you looked at Swahili as it's spoken in Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, because most of the data that does exist is coastal Swahili. And even the 380 million or so Arabic speakers still haven't got anything like the quality and size of data as the 70 million Italian speakers in the world. So it really shows you how inequitable language data is in terms of its digital presence. And that really affects people's ability to engage in all the global conversations, as well as be able to get local information. Please. So we did some research in 2024, which really showed us some of the issues, how this played out in reality. So the humanitarian digital action is mostly done in official or dominant languages, and it's almost entirely text-based. So actually what that means is it's often not reaching vulnerable people because it's not in the language that they speak, and because it's using writing as a means of communication. So the research that we did showed lots of ways in which access was being limited for people, and that it was increasing their risks. So, for example, in things like mobile money transaction, which is a really common way of moving money around, and with registration for humanitarian aid, people who didn't understand the language of the templates, the forms that they were having to fill out online, meant that they were then sharing their personal identifiable information with others to be able to register for aid. And that was exposing them to unscrupulous people who were then using it for their personal gain. And it's also making people unable to access key information like health warning information during epidemics and early warnings during moments of big crises from storms and such. So we also know that the very people who get the least access to education are also the least likely to have had the opportunity to learn the official language of the country they're living in, and to learn to read and write. So very often this is women, very often it's older people with disabilities who had the least opportunity to go to school, and therefore the least opportunity to learn official language. But it doesn't mean that they're not using digital channels. Quite often they have access to a phone, perhaps a shared phone, and they're navigating those telephones using the formats that they can. So sending voice messages to family members, for example, sharing pictures, and listening to audio content. So in the humanitarian crises, what we need to be able to do is to develop technology that meets that community preference. And that's really important and currently highly neglected. Please. So the solution is around speech technology, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the two sets of data that we need to be able to work in to be able to achieve the right kind of voice technology in the right languages. Please. So basically, there are two types of data. You need data to help make decisions about which languages make most sense for investment when you want to try and communicate with certain communities. And then you actually need the voice data that helps build the language models, which can be used to do the communication. We already have language maps, and I've put the link up there in case you want to go and have a look at our language maps. But now we're working on a tool which overlays some of that data with other data about vulnerability and access, which is helping organizations who work in this sector to try and think about which languages to pre-position. So we have a huge number of data sets which we've combined together and turned into kind of quite a complex vulnerability index, which allows for ranking. And it considers a couple of different things. So the first one is around social and development factors. If you really want, money is short and you really want to make sure you're developing voice technology for the people who need it, first of all, you're probably looking at voice technology because you want to jump a literacy gap. So a context like Ukraine has a very high level of humanitarian need, but also very high literacy rates. So it may not be the right choice for voice technology if you had to make some difficult choices. So we've wrapped together a whole set of issues which are around literacy and data literacy and human development indexes to try and give people some indications of that. Then we've also tried to look at what numbers of speakers do you want to be able to reach? Are you trying to do a countrywide communication? Are you going to go for the largest communities? Or are you looking at particular locality and what kind of language decisions you're going to have to make in that one? So we've wrapped some of those together. We've also, in it, looked at which contexts have the most frequent levels of crisis and severity of crisis, the most humanitarian needs, so floods and droughts and conflict and various issues like that, because we know that repeatedly humanitarian emergencies continue to happen irregularly in some contexts. So you need to pre-position the voice data for those contexts already. And then we've also eliminated or reduced the scoring for contexts where there are already good levels of voice data and that's already of the right quality and has already been validated, so that people can start making the decisions that they need to be able to prioritize the languages that are going to make the most difference and which currently are really poorly served. Please. So under the current set of criteria that we've put together, if you were to look at the voice data sets that need most investment for crisis response, these would be them. But the good thing about the way in which we've developed the index is that we can now start adapting it for different needs. So if organizations come to us saying, we're not really interested in crisis response, we're really interested in making sure that we can develop voice-based tools to reach people during their pregnancies. So we want to look at maternal mortality and child mortality rates, some indicators around pregnancy, for example. We can then reduce the weighting that we've put onto crisis response and increase the weighting that we put onto things like maternal health indicators. So we can start giving people tailored advice about which are the languages that would make most sense for investment according to the kind of things that they're interested in, whether that's conflict, whether it's maternal mortality, whether it's around displacement data. And we can start giving the organizations who we're working with the kind of insights they need so that they can choose which languages to invest in. So you remember I said that there were two types of data. The second type that we need to develop speech technology is actually speech. But the problem with this is that a lot of commercial models simply aren't built in the right languages or the right variants for the communities who are most affected by humanitarian emergencies. For example, Portuguese is a relatively well-developed language in the digital field, but it's mostly been based on Brazilian and European variants of Portuguese. So it's actually really poor at recognizing speech patterns from people who speak Portuguese coming from Mozambique or Angola, for example. And likewise, as I was mentioning earlier, things like the Congolese, the Swahili that's available mostly is Swahili from Kenya and Tanzania, and much less of it is from Democratic Republic of Congo. So it's just the wrong variants, which means it's not necessarily going to meet the need of the humanitarian emergencies in those contexts. And also crowdsourced models, if you're just using crowdsources, it tends to be young men from urban or peri-urban situations who are donating their voice. And the result is that the commercial models are less good at hearing women's voices and reflecting how they speak. So we've developed a voice platform where partners can work with us to develop voice models that are tailored to what they need it to be. So it gives a space where our 200,000 linguists who work with us and volunteer with us can contribute their voices, they can read sentences, they can transcribe free parts of audio responding to prompts, and they can validate each other's transcriptions so it can be absolutely of the right quality to build the models that are needed. We take their informed consent very seriously, and it meets European standards of data management so that people can take their voice away again if they change their mind. And our models can be shared either as open source or under sort of Creative Commons non-profit licenses, depending on what our partners prefer. So it's a really interesting way to start building tailor-made solutions when the voice models don't currently match the demand, please. What makes our models different from some of the others that are around, although there are lots of people working in this field and lots of them doing really interesting work, is that we can be very specific around things like the location. So we can make sure we're creating models for a particular dialect, or that we're creating models that encompass lots of dialects. We can make sure that we balance for things like age and gender, so that we can make sure we're getting equal numbers of female voices to male, and that we're getting older voices as well as young people's voices. And also that we can make sure that we're working in a particular domain. So if a voice model generically exists already, that's just generally been developed on conversational content, but you're going to start working around maternal health issues, it's going to need a whole load of domain-specific content created around it. So we can create prompts based around things like flood warnings or extreme heat or maternal health or agriculture or whatever it is, according to what our partners are working on. And the other thing is that the community who work with us get very excited about this contribution of their voice. And there's a lot of kind of community engagement in the process, which can also improve uptake and trust. And so these are the kind of data sets that really make a difference and which we think can help move forwards digital communication for underserved communities. So if anybody is interested to work on this more, we'd be delighted to work with people on it. We would encourage people just really from a very basic level to have try and make sure that language data is always factored into kind of planning, and to use the sort of detailed data that you have available in New York is amazing. It's very rare to have other contexts with that quality of data, but we're always encouraging people to gather language data and to disaggregate by language in looking at services, to try and pre-position voice data, so make sure that voice collection is done in anticipation of needing tools to be able to speak to groups who may be struggling, particularly with written form. And obviously to try and make sure that we all kind of campaign for voice-based solutions, recognizing that literacy is a challenge for very many people, and that by moving to a voice-based communication, we're actually working in the ways that for so many people is actually an easier format for communication. I think that's it. I'm going to leave you with my contact details, and I'm really happy to be here and to join the questions, answer any questions as we move forward. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alice, and the Clear Global team. This has been really helpful to understand how we could utilize the data to make more informed decisions around language access. But before we move on to the Q&A section, I just wanted to leave you with the clear action plans or like key takeaways of our session today. We mentioned about building it, like start with the existing data set that we have. We shared, DCP shared really cool, interesting data sets, data tools that is available in your hands right now. Clear Global also shared some of the data that they also utilize on their website. They have on their website as well, and identify the gaps. I think both DCP and Clear Global mentioned about some of the gaps or challenges with the data sets that they have. Especially, I think I heard from Clear Global around the literacy level, thinking about the variance of different languages. Also, Clear DCP mentioned about the margin of errors of census data as well. So think critically about where those gaps exist. And design ethically. How could you ensure data collection that builds community trust rather than building that ethically and more intentionally? And I think Clear Global kind of walked us into these steps of like how to integrate and prioritize strategically. We understand that resources are very limited, but how do you prioritize based on the data sets available or data that you collected together? And also own it. You have to monitor and iterate. It's a cycle, not just a checkbox. We got to understand that we have to track and see how these data-driven decisions are reaching the intended communities that we hope to reach. And also like language demographic shift all the time. Migration happens in any given moment. So those languages could shift anytime as well. So I wanted to give you this key takeaways, and also we want to also think about how we can change the vicious cycle of language inequities, as I shared in the introduction, to a more virtual cycle. When we try to follow these key takeaways, we transform the vicious cycle of language inequity into a virtual cycle, ensuring data collection leads to, or using data to make informed decisions or evidence-based decisions, and resources reach the communities that need them. And equity gaps continues to narrow. So this is the pathway we want to see language justice to fruition. Thank you so much. And I think we have a couple of questions on the chat, and we're happy to answer some of them as we have a couple of minutes left. I'll bring some of our team to read off any of the questions that are left unanswered. I think I saw Allison's question. Oh, I think she mentioned I'm a bit unfamiliar with what voice data and voice technology refers to exactly. We could get an explanation in Q&A. That would be really helpful. This is geared toward Clear Global.
Thank you. Yes, I tried to answer that in the chat, but I'm very happy to talk to it more. Essentially, you can teach technology using digital tools to read. So rather than somebody having to type a question into a computer or into their telephone or into a search engine, they could speak the words. They could say, I want to know something, and that will then be automatically written down because there's a speech to text model. And then when the information comes up on their phone, it will be presented as a text, but then it will be read out loud to them. So that's what voice technology enables. And somebody else has asked a very good question, which is how do you do that when there are thousands and thousands of words in every language? And essentially the answer is you don't have to teach it every word. You teach it how to read words. in general, a little bit like a child doesn't learn every single word. It learns how to decode words and pronounce it, and also to listen and to turn that, what it's hearing, into code or into written form. So that's essentially what it means. Thank you. Good question.
Amazing. And a lot of people, I think, in the previous chat as well asked about when is the Language Explorer available?
We're hoping to develop a working version by later this spring. But if you have any comments or feedback from what you saw today, send us an email. We really want to hear how you all are using language data and what would be useful in the tool. But our goal is hopefully end of this spring.
Young, I think two more questions in the chat. I'm not sure if we had covered them during the presentation, but one was, are there other municipalities collecting, interpreting, and sharing language data to this level of detail with the communities? And then another one was, are these models driven by AI?
I think it's related to the census data, the first question. The census data is collected in this level, and you can see the PUMS data, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, DCP folks, but those are also available through on different cities and different levels. I believe you can see a lot of those data on census.gov.
Yeah, so all of the ACS data are available from the Census Bureau's website, and the PUMS data as well is available through the Census Bureau. In terms of language dashboards for other areas, we've seen a few out there as we were building ours, but the data are available for anyone outside of New York City to access as well.
Thank you. And I think the other question that was relating to AI was probably addressing my presentation about language data. The language data can be used to create the AI rather than the other way around. Humans sit and record their voices, and gets transcribed by other humans, and that's the language data. So that's not really an AI process in itself. That's human contribution. But then from that, language models can be built. Voice automatic speech recognition and text-to-speech models can be built, and that then allows humans to start speaking, and that becomes transcribed, and that can be incorporated into all sorts of AI modeling. So I hope that's useful as an answer.
Thank you all. I'm excited to see on the chat all the excitement about the Language Explorer data and all the work that Alice and her Clear Global team has been putting together around language data. Very exciting. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you learned a lot through the sessions from both the Department of City Planning and from Clear Global. And now, please, we welcome any of the questions and brainstorming sessions around languages.